you can go back and look at any time there was a lot of money to be made in a short amount of time in a new industry, people took advantage of that, right? Like we didn't stop building railroads because people were getting defrauded in railroad stocks. Going back through history, this is just the newest iteration of something that took off very quickly, created a lot of wealth, destroyed a lot of wealth. And it's just, it doesn't kind of, we don't need to over index on, sort of stamping it out.
Welcome to the ATX DAO podcast, the hub for exploring the forefront of blockchain technology in Austin's Web3 community. We connect you with innovators within ATX DAO and beyond as we venture into the world of decentralized technology. So crack open a beer and join us for a front row seat to learn about the innovations and trends shaping our digital future. This is the ATX DAO podcast.
We're stoked to have you out here. I'm joined by Gerald from DC DAO and Megan from ATX DAO. And me, your resident, Tasmanian devil from ATX DAO. But that being said, we're going to go dig into this new podcast about DC DAO and Gerald and the whole DAO vibe at DC. And we're super stoked about this. And, but the first thing I got to do is I got to shout out our first brand new drink sponsor, Black Star Co-op. They were kind enough to say that Ash, you and Megan and possibly Gerald, this is why we need to do the next one in person, buddy. We could do it at our brewery, which is now sponsoring the podcast. It's kind of wild, but if you're in town, make sure you grab a beer.
That's amazing. Good for you guys, man. That's awesome.
Thanks, bud.
What flavor is that, Ash?
This is a Freya. Comes in at a nice 6%. So I'm really easing into my evening right before I have to go back to look at math and code. So it's pretty nice.
I'm glad we could be a little break for you.
But yeah, dude, would love to hear about you. Megan, jump in.
I think before we get to all the Web3 stuff, I just always really find it interesting just to get to know who are you as a person, where are you from, what's been kind of your whole life. We all had whole lives before we got here, right? So what's your journey been, and let's hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it, guys. I'm excited to be here. Congrats on the sponsorship. That's huge. That's great. Well done on the infomercial portion of that. My story. So I guess I have a relatively interesting sort of background. So my dad is actually from Ireland. My mom is from California. My dad moved to Ireland, met my mom in California. I was born there, and then I moved to the Southeast in second grade. So I grew up in Columbia and South Carolina. So pretty kind of I guess a lot of global sort of exposure early on. Traveled a lot growing up. Played a lot of sports growing up. Was very competitive. Kind of type A millennial story, right? So I joke when I was growing up, I realized I wasn't going to be a professional athlete probably around the time 6th or 7th grade. I was I don't think the NBA is quite ready for me. So I read too many John Grisham books as a kid, and they actually had a judge give me my first copy of the Pelican Brief, and tore through that. And so, not to gear this towards kind of, where I ended up as a lawyer, as an attorney, but that kind of, problem solving and being sort of competitive in a courtroom setting or with somebody across the table always kind of appealed to me. Ended up going to college at University of South Carolina, and then kind of went JD. So I did a bunch of school, way too much grad school, and ended up in Durham for a couple of years, and then Atlanta. But I guess growing up, I was just always very curious. My dad was one of those people who was sort of taking apart computers, and I was on the internet, when I was really young. One of my favorite things to do still, when people complain about UX and Web3, is to show them the AOL guy crossing the screen. I I can't remember exactly. Like somebody will fact check me on this, but I think it's like a 35-second long video. So for everybody watching, it used to take 35 seconds just to get onto the internet. Um, and so I was like very into all that kind of at an early age. I thought it was really interesting. Um, and I just wanted to know sort of where things were going. You know, as I was like playing video games, and I remember like when Halo, like you started being able, like you used to have house parties where you had like 4 separate Xboxes, right? Like this, not to age myself, but like that was the time, right? Like everybody would come over and you would sort of LAN in and like play each other, and then you got to online, and so just watching like the rise of that. Like I also, I had friends right when I got to college who were actually selling World of Warcraft characters. They were like doing that on eBay, which I think is actually part of Vitalik's sort of like origin story. And so that was like fascinating to me that there was this commerce around the internet. Like, how does all that work? Um, and so I got lucky when I was basically I got to law school and realized like billable hours sounded terrible. Um, and so like the idea that your life is going to be measured in like 6-minute increments is like kind of depressing. It's not like Tom Cruise and private jets and stuff. It's a grind, which is good, but has pros and cons. So I decided to do a dual degree. There's an international MBA program in South Carolina, and so I leaned into kind of like consulting and that sort of thing. And then I actually got really lucky and ended up at a company called PitchBook for my summer. I was talking to like VCs. I was at a SaaS company, working their London office. It was like, ping pong table kitchen, like the startup life. And I was like, this is way cooler than, any law firm back home. So kind of leaned into that, and that kind of set me down this path. That was kind of a rambling journey, but that's sort of what I've been up to.
Journeys are kind of rambling, if you ask me. So it sounds about right. Yeah. Well, so that's super cool. Okay. So law school, and I know that like as you kind of like continued that trajectory of, wow, the internet's super cool, which by the way, like the 35 seconds, that does sound absolutely correct, but also you need a second phone line if someone goes to pick up the phone and like disconnects you, like that was also like real life, right? I distinctly remember that. So I feel you there. But so anyway, it's like as you're continuing this trajectory of like kind of just being the perpetual student and always keeping an eye out on tech and Web3, like where did you start to see like that legal baseline become like, super interesting as we're talking about technology, where like that's usually kind of outside of like the go-to periphery of a like typical lawyer in my view. So I'm just curious on your thoughts there.
Yeah, so I've always really appreciated kind of creativity. Like I've never been someone who like really wanted to draw inside the lines, which I think is also kind of weird for an attorney. But it's kind of worked out. I guess the way that it kind of clicked for me, I read a lot when I was in college. And I joke, like I tried to buy Bitcoin, when I was like a broke college student. Like Coinbase was very, very young, maybe nascent. The UX was not great, and I didn't have any money anyways. I was like, college student. So I kind of learned about that. But I also was just fascinated by the idea that people were making careers out of something that didn't really exist yet. And what I wanted to do was take the structures that I learned about. So one of my favorite classes in law school was M&A. One of my favorite classes in law school was mergers and acquisitions. And my professor there was like an ex kind of like Wall Street partner, and the way he explained it was entities. So meaning like an LLC or an S corporation or any of these things. He explained it as these are essentially empty boxes, and what you decide that your box is going to be, basically the regulations will tell you what you can and can't put in that box. And I love that because it was an incredibly flexible mindset in terms of how to approach I've always been very interested in people doing new things, businesses, like, my dad was an entrepreneur, like learning about like, how can I help these guys do what they want to do, right? Like, how do you give a page or a canvas? And so I took that and, kind of basically like my journey was I ended up wanting to learn more about sort of startups and entrepreneurship. So I ended up doing LLM and law and entrepreneurship at Duke and met a lot of great people there, incredible ecosystem, a lot of really smart founders, and kind of edged my way closer and closer to what I don't think it's like frontier technology, but like fintech and healthcare, very heavily regulated places where people were trying to kind of update the system and were having, frankly, like a lot of trouble doing it. Like it was really, really challenging at that time um, for startups. I mean, you talk to a healthcare founder and you find out that basically the main way they're going to get paid is through a reimbursement code that is like actively being lobbied against by like healthcare companies, or you talk to a fintech company that wants to do something that looks like banking but isn't banking, so they're having to go get all these licenses. And so that was kind of the genesis of my like, how do I take this like structuring empty boxes kind of blank canvas stuff and actually give it to somebody who wants to do something interesting. And so that was kind of my journey to like the intersection of where we ended up.
I think that becomes super relevant to DAOs, right? Because that's always like the question that I know that we get from, like, I mean, cities all over the world really have reached out to us, and just it's always the first two questions people have is, how do I build a community, and what's the legal entity that I need to do? And I guess like just speaking like US based at that point, but yeah, so I guess like just because of that like empty box model, which I love that analogy, that's so great, and how that ties to the regulations, what you can and can't do. So how do you see that really like applying to DAOs? Because also like every DAO is kind of an empty box, and they can kind of take different shapes. Like we're a community or social DAO, but that's not the only type of DAO. So yeah, could you kind of like expand on that, please?
Yeah, for sure. So I love these questions. I love talking to founders. I think that you guys have gone through such an interesting journey with the structural approaches you took. And I think early on, a lot of people are just trying to figure this out, right? So you have people who want decisions to be decentralized and governed, and maybe they'll have a token or maybe they won't, right? Like I like to really pull it back to like base level assumptions with people. Like, why are we actually doing this? I think the reason DAOs exist is that a lot of people are sort of upset with kind of top-down hierarchical sort of status quo decision-making apparatuses, right? Like that's fundamentally what we all want to do. We all want to say, hey, what if we build this thing on the internet? How do we share in it? How do we create something that's going to last? And like, how do we do it together? And so what DAOs encounter, apart from sort of the technical exploits, like the DAO, which is an unfortunate part of the history, but existed, is that basically a lot of like law school 101 kind of thing is that if you and I decide to start a lemonade stand tomorrow and we don't call it anything, the federal government is going to tell us that we are a partnership. That's just how it is. So what a lot of people don't realize that. They say, hey, this is America. I think I can do things with my friends. It's like, yes, you can, but you're going to be liable for everything you do. And if you share a bank account, you're going to share that financial liability. So when I talk to founders, I really like to take it from like, what are your actual goals here, right? Like, are you trying to raise money? Are you trying to buy property? Are you trying to organize community events? There are founders who want to build something interesting. I think you want to make sure that you're not going to default into this joint and several liability. So the question that I ask founders is like, what do you actually want to do? What do you want to build? Do you want to buy property? Do you have some IP that you're trying to protect? Do you want to just host events, right? Like, what are your goals? And do you want to have a protocol? Do you want to have a layer one that's, decentralized governance and, worth a lot of money? And so taking that back, like, I think there's not like a one size fits all approach, but some of the ones that we've explored or that I think the legal community has explored it can be as simple as something like an LLC, where you have members and you don't necessarily have formal governing rights, but you may have some kind of an economic interest. Uh, you can have something like what we are at DC DAOs. We're a limited cooperative association. So I've been really fascinated by that kind of regime, I guess, for a while. I like to compare the limited cooperative association, sort of the fundamental guiding principles, to almost like a one-to-one Venn diagram of what a DAO actually sets out to be when you start about it, like, which is collective ownership, federal securities exemption, one member, one vote. And then you still retain some of those traditional, not only corporate protections, but also some of the formal governance that allows things to sort of function, because truly decentralized governance is actually chaos. Like it's very challenging to have, Megan, I don't know if we've talked about this, but when you look at like a threshold quorum for a DAO, in the United States, in an election year for a presidential election, we think 50% turnout is like phenomenal, right? And so, because that's what we're actually talking about, right? We're talking about governance architecture and how that fits into not only the financial aspect, but also like the structural, the liability protection. So we thought limited cooperative associations were really interesting. There's also this new model from Miles Jennings and David Kerr. Miles Andreessen. David Kerr is like a good friend and a very good finance and tax guy is how I'll describe him. Don't get mad at me for that description, David. So there are two really smart people trying to actually also solve this problem in the United States. Because I think what you've seen on the larger scale is a lot of offshore structures being embraced, which makes perfect sense for some of the ways that these things are set up. I would say like Paradigm and Andreessen and many others. I'm part of Lex Punk Army and Gabe Shapiro and his Metal X and Borgs of all, it's all really interesting literature. And I think that we're all trying to piece together this thing that's relatively new, right? Like relatively nascent. Like how do you fit computer code and voting into financial outcomes without upsetting the government? That's kind of what it comes down to. And so we've embraced that model. I think the DUNA that Miles and David have proposed, which is a digital unincorporated nonprofit association, is a very interesting solution. But I'm excited to see where all this goes. I mean, that's, to me, honestly, like that's the most exciting part of being a lawyer in this space, is that we get to try new things, right? Like I have friends who are in real estate and real estate law, and I joke with them that, the law that governs what they're doing hasn't really changed in like 400 years or so. Like you could argue that, sure, like things ebb and flow here and there, but the core principles of what they're doing were written, in the 1800s or so. And so that's what's exciting about being in this space, is we're all just kind of figuring it out together. And so, I've had a lot of fun, talking to founders about what they want to do as well.
Wasn't the LLC, I guess, like prior to the DUNA, wasn't the LLC like 50 or 70 years ago? And that's the most recent legal structure that we've had. Do I have that right?
Yeah, so the Limited Cooperative Association, there's a federal statute actually for the Limited Cooperative Association that was passed. I think it was 2011. The LLC, is like the most recent legal tech innovation, and it's really just a creature of contract. It's not even really like it's a very interesting set of laws. Yeah, but it doesn't change fast. That's for sure.
No.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. No, it's been interesting. I think there's going to be a pretty big acceleration. What's unfortunate about trying out new things is that to be really confident in them, you need someone to like actually go to court and kind of like fight it out, right? Like litigation is probably the least efficient way to figure out if what you're doing is sort of allowed or not. But like we as an industry are kind of going through that path right now, of just waiting to see kind of like what sticks and which battles are winnable and which aren't. And so to your point, like the LLC is a pretty bread and butter structure. Even a limited cooperative associations have their origin in like mining communities and agrarian societies. They're not new things. It's just a federal protection for something that's been around for a long time. And then, we have partnerships. We have a lot of other well-established laws. The question is, when you're doing something that's novel, when you have computer code that's worth money and is sort of interchangeable, because that's what block is essentially a piece of compute worth money. How do you organize around that? Like, what are you allowed to do and not do? And so
I
we're figuring
remember,
that out.
yeah, when we worked on the Duna in Texas with David Kerr and Miles, and really were really deep in that process too. Like a lot of it was really just defining those terms like blockchain and distributed ledger technology in the business code, because they just aren't there. Like, and I know that there was a lot of, um, guidance from David and Miles too, just to say like, we need to still like keep things a little bit more generic because terminology changes over time and laws don't. And it's just very basic things like that. It's just super practical. But yeah, I got very familiar with that whole process, through that really interesting experience with the Texas legislature. But yeah, so that'll be interesting to see how it continues to evolve. And I do want to spend some time talking about DC DAO too. And because that's like, I've been super impressed with what you guys, I mean, you just launched within the past couple weeks. But I know that's not like the first thing you've done. Like you hosted ETHDC and had a really great, phenomenal turnout there. So would love to hear about like kind of going back to those questions that we always hear from cities as they're popping up. How do you build community? What's the legal entity? So would got the legal entity covered pretty well, but tell me what that community experience has been like, and just what that journey's been.
Yeah, absolutely. So um, obviously was have been inspired by the city DAOs, who have been putting together for years, like what you guys did at ATX DAO was fantastic. Um, And yeah, I had a structure in mind. I'd spent probably too much time in that space, trying to figure out something that would stick with the limited cooperative. So I'm excited that we've got this together. Um, DC DAO is kind of unique because the DC community is very tight knit in Web3. Like it's small, but it's growing, and I think DC is kind of overlooked as a tech community. So we have a bunch of interesting builders. It started out with a Telegram. One of our stewards and co-founders, Shaylee, I don't know if he put together. I was fortunate enough to meet them, when I moved to the area a couple of years ago, and get, it's a very open, really, really embracing community. So we were kind of going to these meetups, and I think we were lucky in that we started as a community. Like we started as like a pretty active sort of Telegram group with like meetups and things like that. And at some point, we realized that we were going all over the country and all over the world, like meeting each other at these conferences. Whether it was in like Paris or Lisbon or Austin. And we were doing these little meetups, and we were like, why don't we just let's put some bones around this? Like let's actually turn this into a thing, because there's only so many times you can get somebody to pick up the bar tab, to tell you about their new L1. Um, and so several of us got together, um, a handful of stewards, and kind of the initial. So there's 7 of us. We essentially compose like the board. So it's a very good group. I grew up playing basketball. I like to compare this to like a basketball. We don't have 5-point guards, right? Like we've got tech, we've got marketing, we've got a really diverse skill set. And so we kind of put that together. And it's one of those things where you kind of open source it, and when you're launching a project or you're building a project, people are very excited early on, and then you start having to build stuff. And so people, come and go, which is, we all have lives. We've all got a bunch of stuff to do, but I think there was a group of us that was really passionate about trying to put the DC builder community on the map. And so we organized as a co-op. We really, really leaned on a community that really came out of that Telegram group and a bunch of sort of existing relationships in the industry that we had. And we put on ETHDC this spring, which was, I think, was a great event. That was kind of our first big idea. As many will know, like Sport DAO is also a limited cooperative association. They run East Denver. And so we definitely took a few pages out of their playbook in terms of how we wanted to put things together. We kind of announced it to the community. We all came together and really got very fortunate with a bunch of our sponsors and speakers who decided to come in to join us. And that was kind of the thing that was sort of the flagpole that we wanted to put down was, hey, we're here, we're builder focused. We were able to work with, blockchain associations, Stand With Crypto, Digital Chamber, because our basically we established that our three pillars are community, innovation, and policy. The way we're able to do that, community is obvious. We have really strong founders, really strong, people at everywhere from Circle and Coinbase and MetaMask and, a bunch of really good folks. Innovation, we want to host hackathons. We want to be able to do something like a pitch competition, which I know you guys have looked at as well. And then policy, I think the benefit we have in being DC is that all the world needs is like one more trade association. Like I think we're all set on that front. We have no desire to become a 501c4. But we do bring builders and real world use cases, kind of to the forefront. And so I think we've had a great experience working with some of those folks, talking to them about what we're actually building and what our members are building. So to that point, I really like to think about it ground up, like we're just one step at a time, right? And so I'm building the foundation, building the house. And so to that end, after we had shown that we could put something together, which was ETHDC, it was a great event. We had about 200 people, single day. I think about almost 50 speakers, and a bunch of sponsors, obviously, and so we kind of treated that as like the sort of, the moment of our sort of origin story where we established that we were here as a community. And now we finally have just gotten our NFT membership. And I think what we're excited about being in DC is that there's this moment that crypto is going through in the United States where we're connected to kind of freedom and liberty and this idea of new things. And so we really try to capitalize on that. Our NFT is obviously some kind of like cyberpunk version of Washington crossing the Delaware, which people are quick to point out is obviously not in DC, which is fine. And so the river. And so no, I think, look, like we're really excited about trying to put DC on the map, trying to organize, work with other city communities, and just be more embedded in the community here in DC. So we're looking forward to hosting a lot more events, working with our stakeholders here and building that up.
Yeah, I heard the ETHDC was pretty fun, actually. We were talking about someone we both know mutually, right, earlier. But like, I definitely, if you guys are going to do it again next year, man, it'd be pretty dope to get a few ATX DAO people, builders up there to see what's going on. And, I heard it was really, really good, actually. So I'm kind of sad that I missed out on it this year. So I'd be stoked. I'd be stoked to come up next year.
Yeah, no, we'd love to have you. Megan did a fantastic job. We had Pruitt from 404 DAO and a couple other kind of city DAO builders. And yeah, I mean, we're looking forward to doing it again next year. We're trying to figure out a date. We're going to have a busy fall here in DC, and so we're very excited, looking forward to the spring and, would love to collaborate. Yeah.
Is there something that's happening in the fall season in DC and that's apparently like
Thanksgiving's in November. That's what I'm thinking.
That's what it is.
In November. Yeah.
It's the
Yeah, no, I mean,
tryptophan
so there's
coma.
there, yeah, there is that. Yeah, I think by November we all might need a tryptophan. But no, there's so yeah, there's that. There's DC Startup Week, DC FinTech Week, uh, and we're putting some things together, around those events right now in October. Um, and then yeah, obviously it's going to be chaos, leading up to early November. So we're excited for it. I think it, DC as a community probably has not been at the forefront of a lot of people's minds in the crypto community, right? It's usually it's the Bay, it's New York, it's Austin, um, and I think because of the um, the progress that we've made over the last couple of years, and probably frankly like some blunders that have been made by some regulators, if I may, DC is kind of at the we're kind of the tip of the spear on a lot of this industry stuff. Coming in this fall. So we're excited to if you come through DC, like please look us up and we'd be happy to meet up with you and throw something together. We've been pretty successful with that so far. Having folks from out of DC who are coming in sort of rally the troops, and so we're excited to keep that going.
That's awesome. I gotta ask the question, like, I saw the Blue Devils basketball in the background. I was like, he's a Coach K acolyte for sure. Uh, but like, and going off the basketball analogy, because you talked about the idea of like you have 7 people in your team, they all are like role players, but then also like I wonder, considering you're on DC and is policy your sixth man? Is it like the people on the hill, kind of like the people who are like coming in and being like, yo, like we should really let all the people on the hill be the additional thing that helps drive this policy it becomes like a two-way street. I'm wondering, how do you think about that?
I love that. I hadn't thought about it that way, but I think it's absolutely true. I mean, so one of the one of the benefits of our position as a builder focused community is that we're not going to step on your toes. We don't need to arrange a meeting with a congressman. We don't need to write position paper with you. So we're very open. Like we can work with anybody. And policy, what you realize when you're up here is staffers drive the district. So, when you see that it's, Senator A and Senator B co-sponsoring a piece of legislation, the vast majority of that work has been done by their staff. And staff are just like us, right? Except instead of just being in crypto, they have to know about what's going on with pharma, what's going on with the EPA, what's going on with, local issues. So they're so busy. One of the ways that we've been really effective in trying to work with them is you don't need to be the expert. You don't need to know all the use cases. Come work with us. Like we will tell you, like, I think one of the mistakes that people make is thinking that crypto policy is some kind of monolith. Like we don't all want the same thing, right? Somebody in the Bitcoin community may want to build a mining rig and talk about the power grid. Somebody in NFTs just wants to say like, hey, we're collectibles, we're the same as baseball cards. Like, please don't treat us, any differently. And then you have everyone else who's just looking for kind of, there's the exchanges, and then there's just sort of people looking for regulatory clarity. Like if I launch a token, am I going to get, a Wells notice? And so I think being able to explain those very basic concepts to people who are living legislation every day and utilize that to move things forward has been really effective. Like, seeing FIT pass the House, seeing the FIT 21 Act pass the House, which is a very good kind of regulatory clarity piece of legislation. We're very excited about that. We're excited that, the issue has become somewhat national. I don't know necessarily how it's going to play out yet, but it is good to see it becoming part of the discussion, right? And I will say also, one of the things we realized over the last probably 3 or 4 months is that it's really not politically advantageous at this point to be anti-crypto. It could be there are, I'm sure there are risks associated with being pro-crypto, depending on what your definition of that is, right? Like, I was talking to somebody about this today. Like, I'm not sure what being pro-crypto means, but I think it is positive to be having the conversation and have your door open. And it's really encouraging to see more and more legislators want to have those conversations.
Yeah, most definitely. Considering I mean, the funny thing is like we have this term between all the people that are in the community, especially builders, where we keep saying this mantra where it's like we're so early, and it's like part of that thing is like you said, and I never thought about that. Is like if we're so early, we really don't even know what we are fighting for things that we think will work today and maybe tomorrow, but we don't know what'll work like maybe a month or 2 months or 10 years from the line. So it's like a lot of it is kind of like you just have to kind of build and then go and then put your best foot forward.
Well, and I think honestly what we're fighting for is the right to try it out. Like that's all we really want. Like we want the ability, whether it's a regulatory sandbox or it's clarity on a certain type of asset and how that's going to be treated. Like all we really want is kind of the same approach that sort of the early internet got, because if the United States hadn't given that kind of leeway, and some would disagree with this, right? Like some would say like, yeah, I'm sure there were problems with that approach, but the fact is like the United States is what it is because we let those early tech companies flourish, and we spread all over the world through that. And so I'm excited to see if we can just get kind of the ability to try things out, which I think is a pretty fundamental American principle. Then I think we've at least got that leeway or that path forward for the next 8 or 10 years. And so I'm optimistic that we can get at least that.
I got to take the opening here on this, bro. You left the lane wide open for me. I got to take this. I mean, like, it feels like the slogan right here is like, fuck around and find out, right? In a good way. I'm sorry. I had to do this. I was like, bro, I got to take it to the house. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, but
that's what we're fighting for. We're just finding, we just want to find out. Yeah.
It's the ability just to have the flexibility, and not to like over define those things, especially from like a regular, anything that's going to be like super inked, because like we don't know how things are going to evolve. I mean, like just even look at like where AI has gone in the past like 6 months. Like if we would have tried putting certain guardrails in place 6 months ago, like that just probably wouldn't have worked. And so it's just like creating enough of a place where it's like, okay, well, here are the things that are definitely not cool, the things that are definitely just like flat out illegal fraud, which you don't even have to define, right? Because they're just wrong. But yeah, I think it's just that like flexibility that how do we create disincentives for people to exploit things, because people exploit everything, let's be honest. Right? And they're going to find a way. So bad actors are always going to find a way, but how do we do enough to eliminate some of that without like completely cutting out innovation from happening?
Yeah, I think there were two very scary things for the industry and for policymakers that happened over the last like 2 or 3 years. Obviously, the first one is FTX. Like that was very unfortunate for the industry. It was good old fashioned fraud. It really had nothing to do with crypto, but like he was also very cozy with several people on the Hill who felt very burned by that. And then the Hamas article that came out in the Wall Street Journal that went unredacted, about terrorism financing. I think both of those things are kind of crypto adjacent problems. But to your point, Megan, like, you can go back and look at any time there was a lot of money to be made in a short amount of time in a new industry. People took advantage of that, right? Like we didn't stop building railroads because people were getting defrauded in railroad stocks. Right? That's not what happened. Like we still built it. Arguably, I'm a big fan. You want to build more trains in America? Like, please do it. But no, I think going back through history, this is just the newest iteration of something that took off very quickly, created a lot of wealth, destroyed a lot of wealth, and it doesn't kind of, we don't need to over-index on sort of stamping it out. I think this is a country that really appreciates innovation, and I hope that we can figure that out and explain to everybody that's not just, we got to do a better job with the token go up stuff like we do. Like, guys, like we got to try. All right. Yeah. These meme coins are like, it's fun, it's fine, but like, that's not the use case. So like, let's, that's my soapbox. But no, I think you're right. Like, I think it's sort of just the next phase of innovation. And explaining that to people, goes a long way, especially to counteract some of the damage that's already been done.
The only thing I got to push back on the meme coin thing. I feel like it's a good social capital litmus test, is the way I would define that entire asset class. Just FYI.
That is a very interesting philosophical argument. Yeah. Look, if it's actually, that's probably a whole nother podcast about like the regulatory regime about meme coins. But no, it's fun, and I think it's also interesting to see, frankly, like we were talking, earlier on about like the AOL guy and like walking across the screen, and the UX issues we have with, say like logging into a wallet on like a Chrome browser, or having a really janky interface. Or even just having block times be slow, right? Like just minting something on mainnet. What is exciting, just from an infrastructure and tech layer about meme coins, is that we're figuring out how to do things at like very high TPS with very low fees, right? And like that's great for everybody. So if we can actually have some of these infrastructure providers essentially get stress tested by, like the Solanas, the Says, the Aptoses, the Bases of the world, if they can put up with that kind of volume, in the creation of these things, then I think you've got something there, right? Like, we're not necessarily talking about dinosaurs, with 7-minute block times. So that's exciting from a tech perspective too. So
I wholeheartedly agree. It's a one big UX case study in the entire asset class itself. And like you said, like you'll clearly find what breaks and where it breaks, right? And then you can decide if a community or a DAO that's behind that L1 can make it better, or like no, we don't want to mess with this asset class anymore. We need to just chip it off and then pivot to a different narrative. But you're 100% right. Okay. But yeah, I'm sorry. I just gotta like plug in for the meme coin stuff in the back in the day.
No, I love it.
Good point though, just about like stress testing, and like every new technology needs that at some point, right? So it's meme coins. I guess that's it.
We'll
funny.
see. Yeah, we'll see. It's some new thing, I don't think it's like, yeah, it's like a self-inflicted DDoS attack or something. Like, it's like you're it's a little bit of gambling, right? Not in the legal sense, in the speculative sense. And it actually works. Again, it's probably a whole other podcast, works relatively well with the Howey test. So we're kind of confident there. But yeah, no, it's a really, I think that's the fun thing about where we are as a space, is like we spend so many, like one of the things that we said about ETHDC when we set it up was, we go to so many policy events where we're kind of repeating, like, we hope this legislation passes. This senator is pro, this senator is very against. We think this might happen. And then you go to the other, like with all due respect, like sort of the Stanford blockchain weeks where, there's a PhD up there talking about, my Merkle tree is abstracted and ZK. And you're like, that's amazing, right? We need you, but I can't listen to you. And so what I think is interesting is early on, there was two sort of barbells kind of holding this industry up. And one of them was these pure, like, I'm building dev tools for other devs because I'm a 10x dev. And like, that's amazing. And I think it's very valuable. And then there's just like, let's have fun and see if it breaks, right? Like there's the creatives and the people who are just launching collections and tokens, all kinds of stuff. And what's interesting is like with ETHDC, we wanted to get this community together. And I think crypto is going through this phase as well, where we want to get these, like, what's the middle there, right? Like what's the usable, interesting stuff that people are starting to build? And that could be governance tooling that doesn't make you feel like you're doing brain surgery. It could be, something abstracting away a wallet. I mean, I think some of the stuff in payments is really interesting. It could be, checkout, like bury the blockchain became the phrase for a while. And so, I think the fact that we're going through this sort of maturation phase, like I hope that continues and we keep getting cool, usable stuff out of it. Like that would be great.
Yeah,
I really agree.
I gotta ask, like, speaking of milestones and your ambitions for, like, your wishes for the space, right? And like how we all evolve, right? I gotta ask, like, what is the next big milestones for y'all? I know that you mentioned there's a few events that you guys are holding, but like, like outside of the events, like what's the big macro kind of milestone you want to see like by the end of this year, like for the DAO and for your community, because it's like ultimately the thing that makes the DAO the amazing thing is the community, and what makes the community is the DAO, right? So
Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. And I think one of the beautiful, frustrating things about a DAO is that you don't know what it's going to be because your community is going to take control of it and do whatever they want to do with it. So I think the next big thing for us, hopefully, is something that none of the other stewards come up with, right? Like that's ideally, that would be great. Like we can keep, I think the idea for us as DC DAO is that if you want to do something in crypto and DC, we'd love to be involved. Like that's baseline. Just if you're doing something interesting, I want you to think of us. We'd love to partner with you, whether it's like, we were talking today about doing like a run, in DC that ends at, say, like a Compass Coffee. The founder of Compass Coffee here is actually like a huge crypto guy. And so like, you can pay at USDC. Coinbase did a big activation at their summit here. So like just working with local vendors like that is the way we kind of keep the momentum going. And then, I mean, we do have goals, obviously, about membership. Like we would love to cross a certain threshold. What you guys have done is obviously really impressive and inspiring. And we've seen other communities do great things too. What ATX DAO, 404 DAO is doing and what like Boston DAO is doing are super interesting. There's all these other communities popping up. So we want to learn from you guys. But really, like, I'm excited to not control this thing. Like that's sort of that's honestly, I think that's our goal is, I want a community member to come say like, hey, I have a proposal for this project and I want to form a committee and I want some resources. And DC DAO says, yeah, that's a great idea. Run with it. And, it ends up being really successful, whether that's a project they want to build out of a hackathon or some kind of, community-led initiative. Like that's the next step for us is like, I actually want to do less like with the actual, I want community members to really pick this up and run with it. And so I think we're excited about that.
Definitely takes work. I'll tell you that from just personal, just kind of seeing where we've been is like, you almost like have to actively take that step back, especially because like people we're so used to like pointing to like, oh, this person is in charge or, oh, this person, has the authority for that. And like, sure, you have to maybe like centralize like some things like user password logins or like bank account type stuff. But like everything else is like, I actively try to take a step back from giving opinions on every single thing because I just want to let other people step up. So
yeah, it's interesting because like you want people who just have like extremely high agency, right? Like you want people who you get occasionally you have folks who come up to you at like a happy hour or an event or something and say, hey, we should do like XYZ or like I'm looking to do, this thing. And like, great, what's it look like? What are we doing? Like what, like that, like I'm not gonna that sounds like a good plan. Like please take that and run with it. And I think that's one of those things where people are very used to asking for permission, which, obviously
being
like you
told
need
what to do too.
Yes. Yeah. But, I think what DAOs are all about is like, the collective, kind of hopefully comes through and you end up doing some cool stuff.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Social experiment for sure.
yeah. I feel like there's a real basketball analogy here again. I mean, like, dude, I mean, I'm missing basketball so much. Like it's like an 86 game season, right? Like, so it's super freaking long. So it's like you're always gonna see people like ebb and flow through the season. Like, they get involved, less involved. But like you guys said, like the whole idea is like ultimately they just like are like, yo, I can do this shit. I can take care of it. Like, let me try and grow into this role. Which is kind of dope to see that natural self growth in that position itself and in that community. I thought you were going to be like, bro, I wish every single staffer for, a Congress member, DC DAO, like they have to have an NFT and they're like, hey, these are the people that we need to disseminate all this information to on policy. Go,
I gotta check on their policies on that, but yeah, if you're listening to a staffer, like just shoot me we'd love to have you join. Yeah.
You got to get some DC DAO pins, man. It goes right in their lapel, right underneath the American flag or
We
something like
do.
that. Like,
I
yeah.
know. I got what do I have here? I'm sure I got some Stand with Crypto lapel pins. I got the Bitcoin guy. This is DC. It's funny you say that because I like a stack of lapel pins with us. But
Yeah, I have a cousin who works up there and she's like, it is insane the amount of holes that I have on my like lapels over here just from all the pins I get. It's ridiculous. It's either that or a brooch. It is
yeah,
wild. So yeah.
you gotta have a cause. You gotta have a cause. I will say just because you brought it up, right, this is one of my favorites. I haven't really had an opportunity. I got that at the St. Patrick's Day at the Irish Embassy. So shout out to the
Oh,
Irish Embassy. That was a good one.
nice.
Yeah, bunch of yeah. These are it's funny you mentioned that. Just not because they're just sitting here. You got the bit. I don't know if you guys remember that one from Consensus. It's not exactly a lapel pin.
Yeah. I was trying to figure out, should I wear my Bobby t-shirt today? Because I have that Bobby ticker t-shirt, that was going on as funnily, the meme coin. I don't know if Mr. Kennedy or, Representative Kennedy actually endorses it. I don't think he does, but it is quite a giggle for sure.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's an interesting year. It's an
Yeah.
interesting year. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and just really appreciate like everything that you've, just talked to us about. And again, just super excited to see that, everything that we're doing at ATX DAO is being recognized. Not only that, but people are taking action on it, and not just that, but doing a great job at it. So really excited to see where things go for you and DC DAO just over the next year, and just for you personally too. So yeah, thanks for being part of this with us today.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me. Obviously, you guys have inspired us, and I'm excited to keep it going. And we'll have to get some kind of ATX DC pipeline going here. So excited to keep working with you guys, and thank you again so much for having me on.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the ATX DAO podcast. If you like what you heard, please rate, subscribe, and share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. To learn more about ATX DAO, visit us at atxdao.com and follow us on X, Farcaster, and LinkedIn at ATX DAO. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.